Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, I'm Mike Finnigan. I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of the power I found through the 12 steps and love and support of people like you, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since July 1986, and for that I'm very grateful. Tonight, Anyway, George, you didn't tell me. I thought the light man was going to be here. I want to thank George for asking me to come out and share with you tonight. George has asked me to speak at several meetings, but I get even with him. I show up, I inflict myself on his former friends. So if anybody has any complaints about anything I say tonight, George O'Hagan, well, here is the man you want to talk to. Let's see, my wife was here about a month ago, I guess. So this is the rebuttal. I really feel fortunate to be able to come back while what she said is still fresh in your minds, and I can set the record straight. I am not the reason she's an alcoholic, but she's the reason I know. Anyway, that's another story. George was explaining to me that although the sign says it's a Playa del Rey group, that I am not in Playa del Rey, and but you moved from there, and so you just keep calling it that, and I like that. There's some historical tradition in Alcoholics Anonymous that applies. I've been to Akron, Ohio a few times in my travels and in sobriety. I had a lot of other travels before sobriety. Sometimes I didn't even leave the room, but in an alcoholic rocket ship people call a lounging chair. But anyway, in Akron, the original AA group there that started at Dr. Bob's house then moved to a place called King's School, and they still call it the King's School meeting. It has since moved 3 times. It's not a King's School. They call it the King's School group, and when I called central office there and asked about that meeting, they directed me to a church, and they gave me the same story. Well, we used to be over here, and then we moved to there, but we still call it the King's School Group because we're alcoholics, and we ain't changing shit. Okay. That's an interesting thing. Dr. Bob's house, I've been there a couple times, and that place is amazingly small. His house is, you would think, and it's an historical monument. They got a sign, on a rock out in front of his house, and it's quite an experience to go there and walk through his house. And there's a guy there. My wife and I both we went there together once. I've been there like 3 times, I think. And this guy takes you around, and this guy was pointing out to me this little porch on the front where Dr. Bob used to throw like little half pints. He'd put them in a glove and toss them up on the roof just before he came in. He thought like I did. They'll never know, as I crawl in the front door, But I'm glad to be here, whether I'm in Playa del Rey or not, and you guys can call it whatever you want to. It's okay with me. I had a couple of interesting experiences lately. One of them I want to share with you. I want to welcome our new friend that stood up, and the new people that didn't stand up. If you're any here, we know who you are. I always tell we know who you are. And the people that didn't stand up, George O'Hagan's going to take you out after the meeting and sing Irish drinking songs to you for hours. And next time you'll stand up. That's a hard thing to do. Getting into Alcoholics Anonymous, being in a meeting. I'm sober against all odds, really. It's not part of the definition of an alcoholic to be standing in a church on Friday night, sober, talking to other alcoholics who are also sober. And to illustrate what I mean by that, not too long ago I had a call from a guy who called me at 8:30 in the morning and he said, "Mike?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "This is Jim." And I said, "Jim, yeah." And he said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Help me out. I know a lot of Jims." He said, "I met you at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in 1988. I said, "Oh, Jim." Yeah. There's that grandiosity Carolyn was talking about, "Oh, that Jim. Yeah, I remember, I said, "Well, Jim, it's 1996. It's probably time to, for another meeting. What do you think?" Because he sounded a little fried and at 8:30 in the morning, and he said, "Well, I could tell he was offended because he could tell I really didn't remember him, and so we didn't get off on the right foot, immediately. And he's a touchy kind of guy, and not like me, and anyway, then he said, "Listen, I think I need a little help." And I said, "Well, if you haven't been to a meeting since '88, you probably do, man. What can I do for you?" And he said, "Listen, I got up today," and he said, "I'm throwing up blood. And I have sat astride the toilet, and there's blood in there. And blood's coming out of everywhere, pretty much." And he said, "I think I need to go to a meeting." And I said, maybe we should stop off at the hospital first, just to be safe." He said, "No, I'm okay." And I said, "Where are you at?" And I find out where he is. I said, "I'll be over and pick you up, man." And while I was getting ready to leave, it was, I was still in my robe reading the paper, and by the time I got dressed, he had called me back, and he said, "Never mind." He said, "I think I jumped a gun. I think I'm okay now." And I said, "Wow, that was a miraculous recovery, blood's coming out of everywhere, and now you're okay." I said, "Have you ever heard of denial?" And he goes, "That's more that AA bullshit, And I said, "Well, you don't think you're ready yet?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "I jumped the gun. I'm all right." And he said, "Besides that," now this is my favorite part of the whole conversation. He said to me, seriously, he said, "Besides that, if I quit drinking, what would I do for fun?" And I said, "I don't know, man." I said, You're having more fun than humans should be allowed to have, I said, "That you raise an interesting point, like your description of your life this morning sounds like, you're getting all the goodies, and I wouldn't want to deprive you of any fun." So, that's the disease of alcoholism in a couple minutes conversation, and I used to think that way too, and I'm sure all the rest of us thought that way. And when we hear the preamble that's read at every meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism, and so on. What that says to me is that we're able to do something together that none of us could do alone, And if you're anything like me, you probably tried to do something about it alone. Because my view of myself before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous was somewhat twisted. And what I thought when I looked in the mirror was, first of all, you good-looking son of a bitch. That's the first thing I thought, which I got to tell you, in spite of what you think now, I didn't really look that great when I got here. I know I don't look like an alcoholic, but I looked like one when I came. I was about 50 pounds heavier. I was a yellow person, and I was like very bloated and had a kind of a sneer on my face at all times. And I thought that I was a rugged individualist. You know, if you'd ask me, yeah, I stand on my own 2 feet. I don't take no shit. I don't put up with this. I run my own show. I'm in charge. I'm afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. That's what I would have told you. And the truth was, and I didn't know that at the time, it wasn't until I'd been sober for a while that I realized that I was a terrified human being. And that I realized that I wasn't a rugged individualist, that I was just a frightened, infant, more or less. And so it's amazing that I'm here tonight, and it's amazing that all of us are here tonight, because I'm a lot like the guy Jim that I met in 1988, and my thinking was pretty screwed up when I got here. Aside from the fact that I was dying of alcoholism, I was dying on the inside from all the other symptoms of alcoholism, aside from the physical ones. And I'll give you a quick rundown of how I got here. I'll qualify myself. Tom, our new friend, may not believe that this person he sees before him was actually once a tongue-chewing, knee-walking drunk, but I am. And I remember my first meeting that I went to, everybody looked so good to me that I didn't think they were the alcoholics. I kept looking, down the halls to, where are the sick people? These people are happy. These people look these people piss me off, That's how I felt, because, what's funny? Why are they smiling? Why do they have, I wanted what you people had, but I couldn't admit that to myself on the first meeting I ever came to. And, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. I never know what I'm going to say when I do one of these deals, so I'll start in the middle and work this way, The first meeting I ever came to, I came because my wife had just come out of a hospital. She'd been sober for a couple of weeks. She and I both went to Schick. How's that for thinking? One more bright idea and I might have died, but brilliant, but Schick is that place, for those of you who don't know, that where they used to say that all you need to, 10 days and a couple of 2-day follow-ups, sounded good to me. I thought 10 days sounded like a long time, but Alcoholics Anonymous sounded longer, to me, because I know guys that went to AA and I never saw them again, and that scared me, Go to AA, man, they disappear forever. They're gone, man. I don't know what happens. They tie them up, they send them somewhere, but anyway, my wife had come out of Schick, and she was sober, and we had some friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'll talk about later, maybe or maybe not, and she went to an AA meeting, and because I wanted to support her, and I wasn't sober yet, I said that I would go to this meeting with her. So I put on the best clothes I could find that still fit me. I was down to like overalls and jeans and t-shirts and ball caps pretty much, because that's all I had that would fit. I neglected to buy any clothes to go around my expanding alcoholic body. And so I found the best things I could squeeze into, to wear, because I knew in my heart that when you saw me, you'd know that I didn't belong in AA. I figured, they'll see me and go, what's he doing here? There's nothing wrong with that guy. He's obviously got his shit together. He's a rugged individualist, He stands on his own 2 feet. He don't take no shit. He runs his own show. What's he doing here? He's not one of these weak people that needs to join outfits like AA and, But I got to tell you what happened. As I went up the driveway with my wife, who looked shaky to me in spite of her 10 days at Schick. And I had fortified myself with a couple of beers and a quick shot of Jack Daniels. It was only 11:30 in the morning on Sunday, and I didn't want to, didn't want to offend anybody by appearing to be drunk. I had that much respect for you. But I had kind of quit bathing by now at this point in my drinking. I didn't taper off. I just quit. And so I did a little, kind of slicked back the hair, squeezed into some ugly leisure suit, that thing. I don't know what it was. And, that thing all you guys got still hanging in your closet in the back, But, and the first guy that saw me walk up the driveway at this place ran up to me and said, "You need help." And I hated that guy, And he was like the guy that William was talking about, that wanted his phone number. This guy wouldn't leave me alone. He wanted me to drink coffee. And like I said, I'd had a couple beers and a shot, but at the stage of alcoholism that I was at, that wasn't enough to completely quell the shakes, I had the shakes working by then. I knew what caused the shakes. Alcohol caused the shakes, but I knew what stopped the shakes. Alcohol stops the shakes. And I hadn't quite, because of you people and my desire to help my wife, I hadn't been able to get my intake quite right that day. This guy keeps trying to give me coffee, and I'm like, I don't want any coffee. Leave me alone. And that first meeting, as I said, is where I got mad at you, but also had to admit somewhere deep inside I wanted what you had, And I stood up and identified myself as an alcoholic, which I thought was a really wonderful thing for me to do. And looked at my wife for approval, like, see what I've done for you, And I went home, and the guy that had asked me to come run up to me and said I needed help called me later that day and asked me if I want to go to a meeting. And I said no. I said, I've been in recovery all day. I said, I don't want to overdo it. And I used that thing that I've heard other people say that really don't understand alcoholism and certainly don't understand AA. I said, you have exchanged one addiction for another. I said to him, I wanted to help this man. Obviously he was a little over the top with this recovery deal. And I didn't stay sober after that first meeting. That probably surprises you, based on my open-mindedness, and the complete, ego deflation at depth that I had experienced by that point, which I hadn't. I wasn't ready. Well, I'll move back a little bit. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and neither one of my parents drank. I had a very tough childhood because I had to learn how to drink by myself, and I'm not like a lot of you people that had the example of alcoholic parents. I had to go it alone. It's not easy. Neither one of my parents, I had some, as I said, my name's Finnigan, and my mother's maiden name is Kelly, so there were a few sprinkled throughout the family tree. A few drunks, which we didn't really call them that. We just said they were colorful people, oh yeah, Uncle Bill, a very colorful guy, But I wasn't around alcoholism at all, and I had a happy childhood, and basically, when I look back on it through inventory and work in the 12 steps, I can certainly see that I was sort of uncomfortable from an early age, and I don't really know why, but I just thought that's the way everybody felt, and I know now that isn't true. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to be not just one among many. I wanted to kind of be at the top of the heap, and I had kind of I'll show them attitude, and I don't know I kind of know where that came from, but it's a boring story, so I won't tell you. but Bill Wilson's story is what I identify with a lot of what he says in his story. But that part where he's talking about people jumping off of buildings during, the market crash, where he said, where he says that sickened me. He said I wouldn't jump. I went back to the bar. And he says as he drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. And that was kind of my attitude, as a kid. I had this fierce determination to win. I'll show them, I don't know what I wanted to show them or why, but that was my thinking. And I didn't feel comfortable in groups. I was the kind of guy when I walked into a room full of people like this, like at a party or whatever, your eyes said to me, when I looked at you, what I saw in your eyes was, what's that guy doing here? That's what I saw. Now that was my perception. I hadn't had a drink yet, but that's what I saw. My perception was already screwed up. Because what I found out after my first drink, which was not until pretty late in life, I went away to college. I went to University of Kansas on a basketball scholarship, and the reason I got that scholarship is because of that fierce determination to win, not because of any kind of healthy, competitive drive that young men have. It was because, see, way down inside, I knew I wasn't a man. Way down inside, I knew I wasn't as good as you. And I don't know why I thought that, but that's what I thought. And so what I had to do was excel, and I felt like a phony even then because, how can I be an athlete and how can I be, an all-state Ohio basketball player, and how can all these colleges want me when I'm a coward? That's what I felt like. Way down deep, that's what I felt like. And I didn't want you to know that. That was a secret, So I went to the University of Kansas, and that's where I had my first drink. I was living in a jock dorm, what we call a jock dorm. That was like full of football and basketball players. And there were no tennis players in that dorm. They would have been killed. Everybody, in fact, I had the least amount of hair on my body of anybody in that dorm. And I sweat less than anybody in that dorm. So naturally, I didn't fit in too good there either. And it wasn't the kind of place where you're laying in bed at night feeling way out of place in a strange town, 18 years old in Lawrence, Kansas. I don't know anybody. This guy I'm living with, I just met, and 2 weeks into being there, I hated being there and I wanted to be anywhere else. But it wasn't the kind of place where you could, after the lights are out and you're both in bed, you can kind of roll over and go, Bill, man, could I share something with you? I feel kind of vulnerable tonight. It's just not. It wasn't conducive to that kind of honesty. Mostly, what we talked about was how much ass we kicked that day. I kicked a lot of ass today. I'm gonna kick some more ass tomorrow. And so I needed a drink, and I didn't know I needed a drink because of that fierce determination to win and to excel. You don't drink if you're an athlete. You're told that, that's not what we do. But these guys were, now I'm grown up though, I'm away from home. I'm living on my own. I'm living with these grown up guys. And they asked me if I wanted to go have some drinks, and I said, sure. I was glad they asked me to do anything. And I made an important discovery that night. I found out that I could drink a lot of alcohol, and I found out that it didn't affect me physically the way it seemed to affect a lot of these other guys. They were like stumbling around and acting like assholes, and I was cool, because what happened to me was alcohol changed the room. Didn't just change me. I felt what alcohol did for me and physically, but what it did for me mentally was amazing, because the eyes that said, what's that guy doing here, no longer said that. Your eyes said, welcome. There's Mike. Hi, Mike. Come over and talk with us. There's a lot of love in the room after a few drinks of alcohol for me. You're my people now. I'm entirely comfortable. Alcohol made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I was part of everything. It was terribly exciting for me. And that was the beginning of my journey to Alcoholics Anonymous, because I have since discovered that that's not the way non-alcoholics feel when My mother was an alcoholic, and I've asked her, I've asked plenty of my other friends who aren't alcoholic, what happens when you take a drink? And their description of what happens is nothing like what happens when I take a drink. They like the rooms that they're in and the people they're around just fine the way they are. They like themselves the way they are. They don't, and so when they take alcohol into their system, it changes their perception just like it does mine, but they don't like that. They like things the way they are. You know, they're not threatened by strange people. They don't have these weird self-images and problems that a guy like me has. So they have a few drinks and things start to change and they don't like it, so they stop, you know. And you can't get anywhere like that, you know. I mean, I've told guys, you know, guys that admired the principles of AA and the fellowship, and they've said, wow, that's really a great organization. But, you know, they drink and they throw up and they quit, you know. And you just can't get to AA if you do that, you know. They don't have what it takes, you know. If you want to be an alcoholic, you have to have vision, you know. You have to have a goal. You have to be willing to do anything to achieve that goal. You can't just, you know. And I've drank with guys that, you know, that stopped drinking. One guy told me he wasn't going to drink anymore because he was full, you know. I said, you're full, you know. Go take a piss, man. Do something, you know. It's only 1 o'clock in the morning. Come on. We're going to Vegas. You're going home. You're a punk. You're full. Get out of it. You make me sick. You're never going to amount to shit, you know. Anyway, and while I'm on the subject about people that won't drink enough to get to AA, I might as well let the cat out of the bag for Tom. See, now that we're in AA, we don't drink. And because sometimes we talk about principles and self-improvement and higher power and helping others and trusting God and a lot of other things, and we forget to mention that we don't drink. And sometimes the newcomer doesn't like that. So before I get carried away, I just thought I'd throw that in. You know, if you want to get to AA, you got to drink. And if you want to be successful in Alcoholics Anonymous, you got to quit drinking. Sorry. And that's not, you know, that's important, you know. That's an important point. You know, in the doctor's opinion, which I believe we should read we read chapter 5, and that outlines the practical program of action of recovery in AA, but it doesn't tell us anything about what the problem is. And so when I came to AA and I started hearing chapter 5, I thought, man, that sounds okay, you know. I wasn't one of those guys that went, oh boy, steps, you know, I can't wait, you know. To me it sounded like, rarely have we learned enough, you know, that's what I heard, and that's where I learned how to meditate. See, now today because when I hear the words, rarely have we seen a person fail, I go away, you know. That's my problem today. When I hear those words, I don't know, I got shit to think about and I'm gone, man. I have to make myself listen to chapter 5. Now, I think we ought to read the doctor's opinion, because that describes my problem. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't understand my problem. You know, and my sponsor said, you know, hey, you know, if you don't understand your problem, you got a fool working on you, man, you know. And so that was something I had to read, and that talks about the twofold nature of our illness, you know, the physical allergy coupled with the mental obsession. And in the doctor's opinion, that's the only place in our literature in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous where it says anything about abstinence. That's the only place in the first 164 pages where it says don't drink. There's a few other places where it says drink, Try some controlled drinking, you know. But the only place where it says don't drink is in the doctor's opinion. And in fact, what it says with relation to the abstinence is it says that's how we solve the problem of the physical allergy, you know, which when we take alcohol into our body, you know, triggers the phenomenon of craving. So the way we treat the phenomenon of craving and the physical allergy is by not drinking. And then later on in our literature it talks about how if we didn't take the first drink, then we'd be all right. So we wouldn't, you know, when I think about it, if the only thing to Alcoholics Anonymous, I remember my sponsor telling me when I was fairly new, asking me rather, he said, what do you think the point of Alcoholics Anonymous is? And I said, it's to quit drinking. Shit, everybody knows that, man. You know, he can't fool me this time. This time I got him. This time, because he was always asking me stuff, and I'd say something and he'd go, wrong, you know. You know, he was so mean. He just didn't respect my intellect, you know. But I said, it's to quit drinking. And he said, wrong. I said, no, this time I got him. See, I know. He goes, show me where in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous it says that. I couldn't show him. And he said that the point of Alcoholics Anonymous was to change. You know, and at the time he told me that, that sounded easier to me than not drinking. And I said, good. And he said, no, we presume you're not drinking because you told me you were powerless over alcohol. We'd been over the first step, and yeah, I'm powerless over alcohol. I cannot not drink. I've proven that over and over in my experience, in my 20 plus years of drinking and using other chemicals. I've proven that I cannot stay away, that I will drink against my will. That's what my experience was towards the end of my drinking. There were plenty of days when I said, God, this time I'm not going to drink. I'm not drinking today. I don't give a shit what happens. And then that would happen and I'd drink. You know, I could not drink. So we discussed what the first step meant, that, you know, the two parts of the first step, that I had no power over the drug alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable, and there was no doubt about that. But then he was telling me, no, the point of AA is not to not drink, the point is to change. You're not drinking now, but I promise you that the mind that you brought in here will not allow you to stay sober if you don't change. If you don't change, you will drink. And if you don't change, your life is going to remain the same as it is now. What's different? You haven't had a drink. Does your wife love you yet? Again? No. Kids still looking at you with those big eyes, wondering who's, you know, how's the employment situation? People knocking your door down yet? You haven't had a drink for a while. You're not Mr. Wonderful yet, are you? I guess not. But, and I firmly believe that. You know, that's my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, is the point of Alcoholics Anonymous for me is to change, and that job will never end. The big book tells me that, you know, that I'm not cured of alcoholism. In step 10, it talks about that. It talks about I may be tempted to rest on my laurels. I haven't had a drink for almost 10 years. Am I cured of alcoholism? No. Why not? Because I'm still an alcoholic. If I do pick up that drink, that allergy will be triggered. And so consequently, how do I stay away from that? You know, the book says my problem is in my mind. You know, so I have to continue to treat this mind with these principles. And that's what I'm doing here. How'd I get off on that? Oh yeah, don't drink. Anyway, because I can't change if I continue to drink. You know, one of my initial bright ideas when I came in was that I thought that I could continue drinking and work the 2 through 12. I thought, you know, then I'll have a spiritual awakening and then I can do this one. You know. Right? That makes sense. I mean, why suffer? You know, like do the higher power. I've talked about the existence of God many times, but I usually have to have a few shots of Jack Daniels before I can really get warmed up on the subject. You know, how many times have we stood around in bars debating the existence of God or the nature of God? I don't know about you, but if you're anything like me and in my family, I mean, we talked about that stuff all the time. But to really get into the subject, I got to have a few cocktails. I'm sorry. You're probably not like me. But so I drank for about 20 years after that first experience at the University of Kansas. I dropped out. I went on the road. I dropped out of school because I'm a musician, and that's not important. Certainly in Alcoholics Anonymous, but it was important in terms of my alcoholism, because I got to start traveling around the country with guys that were older than me, and it turned out they were all alcoholics. Damnedest thing. They told me it was part of the lifestyle, which suited me just fine. And they introduced me to some other wonderful chemicals that, changed rooms like booze did. Nothing that booze couldn't help. And so I'm not one of these pure alcoholics. They always crack me up, those guys that, no thanks, I'm going to kill myself with the cooking, Sherry. I don't want any of that, I'm a pure alcoholic, man. I'm only a pig about one thing, Well, I was a pig about everything. I wanted to experience everything. I wanted to experience heroin, wanted to experience cocaine, wanted to experience Seconal and Tuinal and Demerol, anything at all, Marijuana. People talk about their drug of choice. Have you been to Cocaine Anonymous or one of those meetings and told my drug of choice, and what the hell is that guy talking about? What do you got? I choose it. You want to get your head tore up tough, man, you got to be democratic about that stuff, man. You can't, no thank you, scotch only for me. It's always cracked me up. I know what the third tradition says, and that's, I believe in the traditions, and I'm not going to sit up here and give you a drug-a-log or anything. This is part of my story. I'm an alcoholic. I know what that means. I had the disease of alcoholism, but I was a pig about everything, and I apologize for that if that offends anybody. That's part of my story. Tough. In the big book it talks about alcoholics, page 21, having problems with other drugs, Talk about sedatives, have to quiet his nerves, it says, he may try some sedatives. Well, see, I did that to quiet my nerves, It cracks me up, the booze hounds are always, they look down on the cocaine addicts, and the cocaine addicts look down on the booze hounds, and the heroin addicts look down on the cocaine addicts, and the marijuana smoker looks down on all of us, and the glue sniffer looks down, well, we all look down on him, don't we, And everybody's in the gutter, looking down on each other, The definition, a guy, Scott R. up in the valley, he talks about the difference between an alcoholic and a drug addict. He says an alcoholic will, he'll steal your wallet, and then he'll go out and spend your money and get drunk, and he'll come back and apologize to you. And he says the drug addict, he'll steal your wallet, and then he'll help you look for it. Now, I don't know, man. We don't know what happened to that, but I don't know, man. I can't, nowadays, I haven't met too many people coming into AA that haven't experienced all that stuff, but like I said, I never met a drug that booze couldn't help. That was my problem. Drank no matter what, because I could always get that. Alcohol was my answer. And what happened for me was I ran out of time. That's what happened for me. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, like I said, after 20 years. I found a sponsor right off the bat. I had a guy that was my sponsor the day I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was really lucky. And this man, I got to tell you, and a lot of other guys like him, put me on the right track right off the bat, because they put me into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they got me involved in the steps, and they told me, as I said, that the only way I was going to stay sober was to change. And they told me that my problem was not alcohol, that alcohol was a symptom of my problem, and they told me that the 12 steps were going to save my life, and they told me that I had to find a higher power. And they said, you don't have to find a higher power today. Just start on these steps. And they put me into the book and put me to work in that. And the funniest thing happened, you know, I thought I was going to have faith from day one. And they said, no, you don't. You don't have to have faith from day one. All you have to do is this work here. Let's do this work in this book and see what happens, you know. And what happened was that through the 12 steps, I found a higher power that solved my problem. It not only solved my booze problem, but it continues to solve just about every problem that I give him permission to work on, you know. And that's what I found out, is that God operates in my life with my permission. You know, God's not going to take away my free will. I still have the will to do anything that I choose to do. That's what separates me from the other animals on this earth. I have free will. I have the will to make choices. And God's not going to ever suspend that. He's not going to say, no, I'm not going to let Mike make any choices today. I'm going to come in and run things for Mike. No, God works in my life because I ask him to and because I allow him to. And that's something I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know today that, you know, God doesn't love me because I'm good. He loves me because he's good. And I honestly don't believe that God cares if I'm drunk or sober or if I'm good or bad. He just cares. That's what I believe. And I don't care if you believe it or not. That's what I found out today in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got my family back that was, we were estranged for a while. I have 2 children. My daughter was just telling Tom and Roberta, that just got back from a senior trip. She said they used to go to the Bronx Zoo for their senior trip. My daughter went to Mexico, you know, and, you know, she's getting ready to go to college next year, and that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, not only would she, I don't know what would have happened, but I know that she wouldn't have had a father that could support her and love her and see that she gets to follow dreams like that. And I have a son that just started high school, and he's doing pretty good. And I have a wife that I've been married to for 26 years that, you know, 10 years ago we were separated. And we weren't going to be living together anymore. We were talking about a divorce. And instead what's happened is that a month ago she was up here talking to you about Alcoholics Anonymous and about her sobriety. And today I'm here talking to you, you know, and I'm not one of these guys that's going to tell you I love everybody in AA. I don't, you know. Because what I learned in AA is that love requires work. Love requires effort. You know, love is me putting myself forth for somebody else's benefit, you know, and I just don't have the energy to do that for all you guys. But I'll tell you this, you know, I've learned how to love from the best teachers in the world, you know, and that's you guys. Thanks a lot.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.